Hello and welcome to Technical Penguin. I'm here with my RM480. Today we're going to go through the problem where you turn your key and nothing happens. This one is actually fine, but we're going to go through all the troubleshooting steps. So normally you would turn your key and you would hear this click. And then you'd hear a beep because I'm not sitting on the seat. But if you don't hear that, that click, that's, you have a problem. And that's what we're going to tackle today. So let's start with, well, what is that click? This is the main contactor, sometimes also called a relay. The only real difference between a relay and a contactor is the size. If they're larger, we tend to call them contactors. If they're smaller, we tend to call them relays. This one's kind of in the middle, so you'll hear people use both terms. Both relays and contactors are electromechanical switches. That means it uses an electromagnet to close contacts to form an electrical connection. In this case, we supply voltage here, and there's a coil in this bit right here, and by passing voltage through that coil, we create an electromagnet, and it pulls the plunger down, and there's contacts in here that get closed. And when those close, this terminal and this terminal, these two large ones, get connected. Now this terminal is connected to the battery, and this goes to the controllers. So when we close those contacts, we're now connecting the battery to the rest of the mower. Now this coil, this is a 12 volt coil, and you're thinking, well, but this is a 48 volt mower. So where are you getting the 12 volts from? There's a little box right here. This is a DC to DC converter, and this converts the 48 volts off the battery into 12 volts for the coil and for some accessories. So there are a lot of reasons this system could fail. The contactor itself could be bad. That's not very common. Usually the problem is that you're not getting 12 volts to the coil. And that could be because this DC to DC converter has gone bad, but more often than that, it's that we're not actually getting power to the DC to DC converter. So let's go through our troubleshooting steps and see if we can figure out where the issue is. Before we get into troubleshooting, let's talk about tools. So the main tool you're going to need for this is a multimeter. I picked this one up for about $50 on Amazon. I'll put a link below. This is probably more than you need. You can probably get a decent meter for about $15. You can, and I'll link to a cheaper alternative. You can even go to Harbor Freight, and often they have a very cheap meter for about $5. I wouldn't trust my life on it, but for these purposes, it's probably good enough. So if you have a meter like this is just going to be a quick tutorial on how to use these meters. This meter doesn't have separate AC and DC, so I put it onto the voltage, and then I have to press, see it goes to AC, and I have to press select to take it to DC. And then it will auto range, meaning that whatever I connect it to, it's going to cycle through its different ranges until it finds the appropriate range. Now, there are other types of meters. This meter, I've had this meter, I don't know, at least 25 years. And this doesn't even have AC. This is specifically an automotive meter. And you can kind of see on there, it has different ranges. And this is what you would typically see for a cheaper meter. So what you want to do is get into the 200 volt range. Because everything that we're dealing with, we'll be dealing with 12 volts, but we'll also be dealing with up to 60 volts on these mowers. So you want to make sure that you have a range that's appropriate. Also, for the terminals, you'll see there's usually one that's common, and then there's one, it'll have a V on it for voltage, and just make sure it's in there. This meter actually will tell you where you want to plug in the leads. It actually has lights. It's probably hard to see in the sun, but it actually has lights next to the leads to tell you which one. But to be honest, about 99.9% of the time, you're going to leave these leads exactly where they are. This other this other port is really only used for measuring amps, and it just doesn't come up that often, to be honest. So let's begin our troubleshooting. So the first thing is pretty easy. You turn the key on, and you turn the headlights on. And so if I do that on my actual mower, I don't know if you probably can't see, but these headlights are working. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we are getting 12 volts into the system, right? It means that everything up to 12 volts at least is working. Now, if that's the case, you may have a bad contactor, because these lights run on 12 volts and the contactor runs on 12 volts. So you know you're at least getting 12 volts out of the DC to DC converter. So there's honestly not a lot of other things that that could go wrong at that point. So if you've got that condition, you can kind of skip through all these other steps and just skip ahead to where we're looking at the contactor. But if you don't have that, one thing you may want to, this may be an indicator, is if you have the old original gauge and it lights up, well, that's an indicator that at least you're getting voltage through your key switch. Because this runs on the 48 volt system. So that brings us to our next step. If you don't have headlights, the next step is actually to check the voltage at the charge port. So let's go over to the charge port. Okay, so now we're at the charge port. You'll want to put the positive lead in the left side and the negative lead on the right side. If you mix those up, it's not a big deal. You're just gonna get a negative value. You can see here our battery's a little low. We're at 51.4 volts, but that tells us we at least have battery voltage to the charge port, which is a prerequisite for the rest of the system. If you don't have battery voltage here, if you have a no voltage, or if you have much lower voltage than you should have at your battery, the first thing you want to do is just check the voltage at the battery. Make sure that it is what you expect it to be, and make sure you don't have a battery problem. Assuming that the voltage is good at the battery, then you probably have a bad charge port. If you suspect you have a bad charge port and you want to confirm whether the internal fuse is blown, you can do this simple bench test. So set your meter to continuity. That's the little speaker symbol, and you can confirm it's working by touching the leads together, and you'll get a tone. So this is a good charge port, and we put the lead on the positive side, so the bottom left, and then we'll put a lead on the Anderson connector on the red side, and we get a tone and we get full connectivity. Now this is a bad one, and we do the same thing. We put the probe on the bottom left pin, and then we put the probe on the Anderson connector, and we get nothing. So in this case, this one, the internal fuse is blown, and in this one, it's perfectly fine. Okay, so if you have voltage on your charge board, the next thing to do is check the charge lockout. So that is zip tied up here. It's like a small black box. I'm gonna go ahead and cut these zip ties so I can bring it down. There we go. So this is our charge lockout. First thing you want to do is you want to backstab the black wire, or the black lead, into the black wire. And then you want to do the same thing on the red wire. And with the key on, you should be getting battery voltage there. Now, assuming you have battery voltage there, the next thing you want to do is check the yellow wire and see if the yellow wire also has battery voltage. If it does, your charge lockout system is fine. If it doesn't have voltage on the yellow wire, Then we want to check the charge port again, but a different part of the charge port. So assuming you had voltage on red, but you didn't have anything on yellow, you want to leave the black wire backstabbed. And then you want to disconnect this blue wire. And the side that's going to the charge port, so not this side, the other side, you want to connect the red lead to that. And you should get something close to battery voltage. It's not quite, it's usually about maybe a volt less, but it should be very close to battery voltage. If you're getting that, your charge port is probably fine. And what's probably bad is your charge lockout relay, which is this part. If you have a bad charge lockout relay or a bad charge port, and you want to make sure there's nothing else wrong with the mower, just as a test, you can take a small piece of wire. This is just 14 gauge Romex. It's the same kind of wire that's in the walls of your house. And you can connect the red and the yellow. Do this with the key off, because otherwise you might get a little bit scared when it connects. So all you got to do is just connect those, and then when you turn the key on, you should hear that click. If you don't, you have other problems. But this should at least allow you to check what else is wrong, and then you can go order the parts that you need without having to worry that there's going to be something else down the road. In the next section, I'm going to be checking the key switch. When you check the key switch is going to be dependent on your mower. This order is fine, but depending on what mower you have, the key switch might always be powered by 48 volts. It might only be powered by 48 volts if your charge lockout is good. So if you're not getting power at your charge lockout, check your key switch. Make sure you're getting power through your key switch. If you are getting power through your charge lockout, but you're not getting power to your DC to DC converter, that also might be the key switch. It really is going to depend on which model you have, because it's going to be different depending on the model and depending on when it was manufactured. There are a couple ways to test the key switch. To do a voltage test, you set your meter for volts, for DC volts, and you connect the black lead to some ground in here. All the black wires are ground. In this case, I use the forward reverse switch. So the middle is ground, so just slide the probe in there to make sure it's making contact. And then on the key switch, slide back the little protective cover on the red wire and then connect to that red wire. And what you'll see is you should have battery voltage there. Okay? And that's regardless if it's on or not. Now, you want to slide that wire back and then make sure that the key is on, and then slide down the little protector over the green wire and then connect to the green wire, and you should again see battery voltage there. If you're not seeing that, then you probably have a bad switch. You can try moving these leads over to the other side, right? So they're connected by default to the power side, but you can connect it to the aux side, and it functions exactly the same way, but you just have to turn the key in the other direction. So just make sure you put those back. You don't want any exposed wires in there. A different method for checking the switch is a continuity check. And the way this works is you want to disconnect one side. And the way that these little connectors work, there's a little tab on them, so just make sure you push that tab in before you try to pull. Otherwise, you'll just be pulling and pulling, and you can damage the switch. So you have one side disconnected, and then pull down the protective sleeve on the other one. Let's tuck that out of the way so I don't have to look at it. And then basically, with the key off, all right, so we want to switch this over to continuity, okay? You can test that. Just connect them together. You get a tone. And then you want to connect these together, and you should have nothing, right? Between those two tabs that the wire is connected to, you should have nothing. Okay? And then if you turn it on and then do it again, now you should have full continuity. Now, you don't have to do both of these tests. These test the exact same thing, but they're different methods depending on if you have power or not. If you have, say, a replacement switch, you want to make sure it's good, you do a continuity test on it. Okay, and then just make sure that you turn the key off and put these wires back where they were. Make sure you have a good connection. Make sure the protective sleeve is on them. Okay. Assuming everything else checked out, you want to measure the voltage at the small terminals on the contactor. It should be right around 12. If it's not, then you'll want to check out the DC to DC converter. If it is, then you'll want to check out the contactor. So if you suspect the DC to DC converter, the first thing to check is this fuse. There's a 2 amp fuse here. You can do a continuity test on it. You can pull it out. And switch over to continuity, and then just connect one lead to one side and one lead to the other. And this fuse is good. Sometimes you can also visually see that, but you can usually tell if a fuse is bad visually, but you can't necessarily tell if it's good visually because it might have a very small crack in it. So while we have this out, we can also measure to make sure we're getting voltage here. Now, the DC to DC converter has this waterproof connector. It has these little pins. You can measure off of those, but typically the ground is not the problem. So an easy way to check, just to make sure you're getting positive voltage there, is actually to put this in the mower side, switch back to volts, and then just put this in the right port of the charge port. You can see we got battery voltage. Now, if you suspect that there may be some broken wires or something like that, you'll want to open this up and double check the contacts. But if you're getting voltage there and you're not getting 12 volts here, you most likely have a bad DC to DC converter. It's all this wiring. It's in here. Maybe if you had a mouse that chewed something up, you could have a problem, but typically that's fine otherwise. Now, if you're getting 12 volts here and the contactor's not working, you probably have a bad contactor. There's additional checks you can do to test the coil. Make sure one side is completely disconnected. You probably have to loosen the other side in order to get this diode off. And you want to switch your meter over to ohms. That's that upside down horseshoe looking thing. It may be the same as continuity. It depends on the meter. And then you want to connect a test lead to each side, and you're going to get something around 16 ohms, maybe 18, somewhere in that range. If you get a very high number, and make sure you check at what range your meter is on. So if you got a very high number, like 1 mega ohm, or nothing at all, that would indicate that the coil is actually broken inside. If you get a very low number, like 0, that would indicate that there's a short, so that the coil is bad and you need to replace the contactor. But if you get something around 16 to 18 ohms, that's pretty normal. While you're here, you probably want to test this diode. Now, there's a diode on most meters. There's a diode setting. So it will look like you have to make sure that it, depending on the meter, you actually have to select into it. It'll look kind of like a triangle running into a line. And that's because diodes only allow voltage to go in one direction. So with a diode, you have to measure it both ways. So in this case, we measure it one way and we get nothing. And that's what we expect. And then you swap the leads and you want something around 0.6 or 0.7 volts. And that's an indication of a good diode. If you get a reading in both directions, then that diode is shorted and it should be replaced. If you don't get a value in one direction, that's a case that the diode has failed and needs to be replaced. I hope this video was helpful. If I left anything out or you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment. Click subscribe if you want to be notified of my future videos, and be sure to check out technicalpenguin.net for more tips on these Ryobi 48V mowers. Thanks for watching.